The challenge, of course, is that we've not progressed far enough with that. So when we look at the protection of the ocean, and we add all the efforts of all the countries of the world together, we've only protected about 3.5% of the ocean. So there is a considerable distance to go between 3.5% and 10% by 2020. And if you want to know how well we've been doing and what was involved to get even that far, then there's a great paper which is actually will come out about now, written by a lady called Jane Lubchenco, who was in charge of NOAA, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration in America. And this actually very handily charts for us the rise of protection in the ocean. But what I want you to look at quite closely is the fact that there are two figures here. This is by year, the total amount of protection, and the bottom one is actually what we're strictly protecting. So that's where the recovery will happen. So we might have protected 3.5%, but only 1.5% is in places which is actually going to have the best chance of promoting recovery. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because we're an ocean world, and what we know and what we've learned is there's a great difference between us, who have a flourishing ocean, and places now we know that did have water and did have oceans, such as Mars. What perhaps we need to realise beyond everything else is it's the ocean that keeps us going. It's the ocean that integrates climate. It's the ocean that drives our weather. And if there's ever a time in the year when the world meets in Paris at the end of the year to stress the role of the ocean, it's now. And when we look at it, when you look at where the heat has gone from climate change, people say and worry about the effects of heat on land. Well, since 1970, 93% of the heat we've generated has been absorbed by the ocean. The ocean has been our friend, in a sense, of taking away some of that heat, which otherwise would have made life on land far worse for us. When we look at the carbon dioxide we're emitting, it's the ocean that's been our friend. 28% of the carbon we emit each year is absorbed by the ocean. Just under half stays in the atmosphere, and half is absorbed by plants on land. So when we think of managing climate change and we think of protecting the forests, we need to be protecting the ocean as well. Equally important, if you just look at the figures. And when you think of where all the water is, of course it's actually predominantly in the ocean. And that has big issues when you look across this, that it's the ocean we need to worry about for warming. It's the ocean that we need to worry about for acidification. It's the ocean we need to worry about for sea level rise. And this will touch all of us in some way or another. So protecting the ocean becomes absolutely critical. And we protect it for a variety of reasons. We protect it because it actually contains habitats, both at the fringes and actually on the open ocean, that are critically important for managing carbon. We now know that seagrass meadows, that mangroves, that tidal marshes contain per unit area much more carbon than forests. So the role of protected areas in protecting that is disproportionately important. We know that a healthy ocean matters for ecosystem-based solutions, and that when you factor in the ocean and the value of the services, some of them dwarf the values we might have originally argued about just on land. But we protect it because of beauty. We protect it because of diversity, or perhaps some of the strangest and oddest looking species. And we protect it because when the ocean calls to you, it must connect to you. We're meant to get whale sound at this point. Let's try one more time. Let's try and play. When you add it all up, though, the value of the ocean is quite considerable. It's been described this last year as the seventh largest economy on the planet. And indeed, the value of the ocean actually surpasses the sovereign wealth funds of the largest economies. When you look at the value, you realise that 70% of this value is dependent on a healthy ocean. So we need to be thinking of the ocean in terms of how we might manage economy, not of using it, but protecting and using it wisely. And we know the challenges. We know the challenges we face. What causes ocean decline? Rising demand for resources, technological advances, decline of fish stocks, climate change and biodiversity losses, and weak governance for half of the world beyond the jurisdiction of countries called the high seas that is yet to have even a proper conservation framework. When we add this together, we see that that pretty blue planet we saw from afar has been massively altered and changed. So we see that 41% of the ocean has been affected by climate change and by other effects in terms of the impact that we've had. What we also know now, more than ever, is the issue that this has had for biodiversity. This was a headline in the paper not so long ago in the UK, which was looking at the effects and the impacts on the ocean. Marine life has halved. And this was based on something called the Living Blue Planet report that WWF did. And what they did is they analysed some nearly 6,000 populations of 1,234 species. And what they recorded between 1970 and 2012 was a 49% decline in ocean life. When you look at that for fish, it's around 50%. And then when you look at that for some of the species we particularly take out the ocean, extract, like tuna, mackerel and bonito, that decline is 74%. So we have a real choice here. We have a choice about whether we go forward and we continue as we're continuing. We have a choice about whether we think that 3.5% protection isn't enough and we do something about it. And we have a choice about whether we put the correct management in place to allow ecosystems to recover. We have added challenges though. We have multiple stresses, this whole issue of climate change and warming and deoxygenation that is going to make our lives much more difficult. And we have the reality that we're going to have to be even more ambitious if we're going to counter some of these challenges and threats that we have. But there are key opportunities. Alongside protecting the ocean, what could we do? Well, we can inform people about making more sustainable choices for what we eat out the ocean. It's not a question of not eating things that come from the sea, but it's an issue about thinking about what you do eat. On land, would we try and eat all the lions and tigers in the Serengeti? That's the equivalent of what we're doing by eating tuna. They're at the very top of the food chain. We would probably eat lower in the food chain. Chickens, things like that shorter lifespan and are easier to breed and reproduce. We can actively restore some of our coastal habitats. We know how to do these things now. The science of restoration has become much clearer in recent decades. We know the things we need to do to help restore coral reefs. Sustainable tourism. We can think of ways in which people can enjoy places without damaging them. And indeed, in many places in the world, they're starting to create really sustainable flows of income from working out what that formula looks like. And we can think of shipping and how we might make shipping greener. I said in a previous presentation this morning, it's 90% of everything. When you actually think of what is moved around around the planet, 90% of it is moved around on the ocean. So that becomes critically important. We might have focused on airlines and emissions from airlines. Well, there's many more ships around the world we need to think about. And then it's country commitments to protecting more that's become important in recent years. The World Parks Congress that we held in Sydney, in Australia, last autumn, where we got 6,500 people coming. It was probably about twice what we expected. And we also had countries coming with commitments to protect the ocean from all around the world, from Gabon, Comoros, through to South Africa, and the Republic of Kiribati in the US. And just in the last week or so, we've had more commitments. So, for example, from New Zealand, the Kermadec Ocean Sanctuary was announced. And then Chile announced at the Our Ocean Conference just 10 days ago the creation of one of the largest marine reserves in the Americas. So there are things which are happening, but we really need to do more. We need to think of how to inspire people to do more and to feel more committed. Part of that is us coming together as a community to talk about marine protection. And we started something called the International Marine Protected Area Congresses nearly 10, 12 years ago now in Australia. And we've then met in the USA, and most recently in 2013 in France. We had 1,800 MPA experts come together from nearly 90 countries. Arguably the largest gathering of marine protected area experts on the planet. Chile is hosting it in 2017, so it will come to your part of the world, and we hope even more people will come together and seize the opportunity to build new partnerships and new networks and make more announcements for how countries are committing to protect the ocean. We also need to publish more. So one of my frustrations when we have big events like these congresses has been that everyone talks about amazing things, describes wonderful new discoveries, new approaches and new science, and then everybody goes back to the office and is completely swamped by emails, and you lose it. And so what we're trying to do is encourage through special issues of a journal the publication of the latest science on marine protected areas. And we did this from the meeting in France. And in 1 year we published over 250 pages of new peer-reviewed information capturing the latest ideas on how to manage marine protected areas. We're doing this again from the World Parks Congress in Sydney. And we have the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii next year where we'll do the same. So we want to try and set a tradition with big meetings, that big meetings produce publications, so that we actually publish quickly our ideas and findings. It's also about making sure that the sites that we create, the marine protected areas we create, are effectively managed. At this meeting in Australia I mentioned last year, we launched something called the Green List of Protected Areas. And the Green List of Protected Areas is places in the world that have the right management where things are going well. You tend to hear a lot of problems about management issues on sites. Well, let's work with countries and showcase what's happening, what's good. And it's great, I was saying earlier, Colombia is one of the countries which has been trialling this, and we even have a green listed marine site in the first test of this globally in Colombia. So it's wonderful, and this region is really playing its part to inspire others to better manage their protected areas. And what this is about promoting success and achievements in biodiversity conservation outcomes. It's about recognising all the hard work that goes on. I mean, I showed you earlier the thing that countries like to do is announce new protected areas, and then we don't really see the efforts to get management right. And so this will showcase and will celebrate those efforts. And it will also enable us to work with marine protected area and protected area agencies across the world to share knowledge, to help build capacity and help people achieve the quality that's needed to safeguard biodiversity in such challenging times. It's about inspiring us to think about resilience. It's not good enough just to think about counting things in protected areas. It's about thinking about how we make sure those protected areas come together as a whole, how we get resilience in species. And this is from a part of an informatic, a wall chart that has been produced for the Maldives, which has just been released, funded by USAID, to try and get all the hotel chains and all the people in that part of the world to understand what comes together to help make resilience in the particular challenges and particular protected areas that they have. It's about embracing the variety of ways in which people can contribute. So don't think of protected areas and marine protected areas purely as the legal framework sites that are important. It's also about, particularly in places like the Pacific, so that's fishing on the open ocean. But we can go better than that. So this now is switching on different fishing fleets. And you'll see the dates running along the bottom. This uses the transponder information from fishing boats. And this is the first time this has been done publicly. We helped them launch it last autumn in Sydney. And so it gives you an idea that it is not an empty ocean out there anymore, and there's a breathtaking amount of things going off, and just because we can't see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't matter. And so actually working out how we deal with that means that we will develop technologies to see what a fishing boat's been doing. So this is the trail of one fishing boat. The detail's a bit too small to read on my screen, your screen on the right-hand side. But the technology now exists to be able to look at what people are doing out there. This isn't the complete picture. So to get the complete picture, you need to bring all the different assets together. That's also been looked at through another system. So this is Eyes on the Sea. This is funded by the Pew Charitable Trust in America. And it actually operates through a UK government initiative on satellites, which is based in Harwell in Oxfordshire. It's a satellite application catapult. Catapult is a series of centres the UK government has invested in to catapult, to push forward technology. We have one on genomes. We have one on satellites. This is the one that's being worked with. This is from the control centre. So this is all the fishing boats. And these are the EEZs. And then you can go down and you can actually look and you can see what they're doing. So this one is fishing on the continental shelf margin of Scotland. So expect some dramatic changes in the coming months and years. Alongside this, Google has just bought a company called Skybox. Skybox is a constellation, will be a constellation of 13 satellites giving 1 meter resolution up to 3 times a day for the entire surface of the Earth. And it's just going up. Look it up online. In Chile, and this is announced by the White House site, so you can go to the White House site and see this. The US government has now launched something called Sea Scout, which will draw on the technologies I've been describing and work with other countries to finally try and outlaw illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing. To do this, they will enhance some of their technology, including the ability to see the fishing lights. Not all boats have receivers. So what if you could see the fishing lights? And let me show you what it looks like. So this is fishing off your part of the world. These are fishing boats. This is the east coast, South America. And these are the squid fishing boats. Recent photos from the International Space Station. This is fishing boats through cloud in Asia. So ultimately, it will be a struggle to make this watertight, but perhaps no longer the excuse is it's too far, it's too remote, and we have too few resources. That's got to change. We also need to think not just about those things, but about inspiring people to be able to understand the ocean and act much more. So new approaches to show the public the ocean and why protection matters. So this has been a personal endeavour of mine to give you all technology that can help you do this, and you probably don't know what we did, but you're about to find out. So this was about putting ocean protection in the palm of your hand. So quite a few years ago, we formed a partnership with Google to try and change how you all see things. So it's about taking the real world and putting it into a virtual world and actually creating the opportunity for three-dimensional views of the ocean around the world. And in 2009, after 3 years of development, and this was something Sylvia Earle, who I showed you earlier, and myself came up with the idea we should do. We convinced Google. We launched it 2 years ago. We had the 1 billionth download, so we touched about a fifth of the planet. And I'll just show you an idea of what this looks like. So this is the City of London. And I'll just fly you out and fly you around the world a bit and show you the sort of technology, and then we'll show you how we've used this as a canvas to create further technologies to engage many more people. So as we fly out, one of the challenges we had was how to make a virtual sphere have a three-dimensional ocean. It's easy for mountains going up. It's quite difficult to go below sea level. It took the team at Google 3 years. Information was declassified from the US Navy. They had a team of 6 people working on this. And this formed the best at-scale 3D representation, which has inspired others to act to do this. So we can zoom in, and you can see a sea surface shimmering like on a summer day. And there was one guy in 20% of his time at Google who built this because he thought it was fun. Clever guys. And then, of course, we take a run up, what you can do, and we had a big debate in Google about whether there would be a splashing sound when we did this, is you can go under the surface. So once you've done this, and you've created a virtual three-dimensional world, you can then start putting things on it. So, thinking of a protected wreck site, why don't we go and look at the Titanic? So let me fly you to the Titanic. And this enabled us to start using SketchUp technology. So you could start to see three-dimensional things. There's the Titanic. And so this was a game changer, because it inspired other people to start doing things. Now I can go on with that, there's more than that, but I'm going to deny you that because we've got other good things to see. And how has this touched all your lives? Well, if you do a Google search, even on maps now you get a three-dimensional ocean. And the searches on maps are billions more than on Google Earth. So we sort of achieved, Sylvia and I sort of achieved one of the things we wanted to do, which was get people to see a bit more ocean in your daily lives. But we can go further than that. So what we really wanted to do was show people real things underwater rather than model, because that's effectively a digital model. And so part of this has been a partnership with Google and Catlin Seaview, who created these amazing underwater camera systems. So what this is leading to is, people know about Street View. What happens if you could take Street View underwater? And this is what this camera does. And what we did for the Parks Congress in Australia is we pre-shot Street View so we could show people in Sydney what, in 3 dimensions, what was beneath the water in and around Sydney. So this is the team in front of the famous Opera House. This is the nurse shark at Magic Point. And this is Manly, as this is Shelley Beach at Manly, as you've never seen it before. So what I thought would be really cool for you, we've done it for 2 years, is to get Google and Catlin to do a little montage around the world of what this technology does. course, the great thing is you can now go home and go diving on your computers. So what else can we do? Well, we really need to close that gap, that 50% of the world gap I talked about for the high seas. And is there hope for the high seas? Well, it's taken us a decade or so of arguing, but finally, in January this year, in the middle of a blizzard in New York, countries of the world decided that it was time that we needed to actually see if we could give a conservation framework to the high seas. So there's now a process running that will look at this within the whole UN process. It's UN Law of the Sea that regulates, is a regulatory framework. And this will create, hopefully, a legally binding international agreement that will enable us to have protected areas outside the jurisdiction of individual countries. It will deal with environmental impact assessments, looking after those genetic resources I talked about, and looking at technology transfer and capacity building. So, there's hope. There's more hope. Just in September, the new Sustainable Development Agenda was agreed. And there's an entire goal now for oceans. We're no longer hidden as "and ocean" on the end of some sentence somewhere. So again, there's a priority. And what are we working on right now? Well, if you look at places like the Grand Canyon, you look at places like the Serengeti, and other places you'll know in the region which are World Heritage Sites, it's equally odd that for 50% of the planet, we don't acknowledge that there's anything outstanding. But there are, and we're going to try and do something about that. So perhaps not the Serengeti, perhaps the Sargasso Sea. But if you want to see really amazing places, dip beneath the surface. Go to somewhere called the Lost City on the Atlantis Massif, the Lost City of Atlantis. And this is named because of the amazing geology, amazing towers of white calcite that come up from the seabed that look like pillars, perhaps a bit sort of squiffy pillars, of old cities. And let me show you just the scale of this. A 30-foot carbonate tower on the Lost City. You want bigger? Try 200 feet. These at the moment are outside our ability to protect, and we don't acknowledge things like that are World Heritage. In my book, they're absolutely World Heritage, and we need to do something about it. And that's what we're going to try and do. And then finally, how do we inspire many more people to act? Well, one of the things which I've talked about previously when I was in Bogota last year was the work we've done with Sylvia over a wish she was given by an organisation called TED. It stands for Technology, Entertainment and Design. It's based in America. They choose 1 or 2 individuals each year and give them a wish to change the world, and then all the organisations try and help make this happen. And her wish was to establish hope spots. Places in the ocean, special places in the ocean where we can take hope. We can take joy from the fact that they're about to be protected, or they need to be protected, or they could be recovered. And we took a ship to the Galapagos for that wish with 100 people, including some very well-known people. So, for example, we have just down here, plain clothes, Leonardo DiCaprio, Ed Norton. And we created a film called Mission Blue. And then we made a deal with Netflix. So this is Netflix's first ocean documentary. It's now showing over 40 countries online, to around 45 million people. And the great thing is that 3 weeks ago we got an Emmy. Not quite an Oscar, but we got an Emmy for this. The great thing is that this is the only Emmy that Netflix got. And it's an ocean film. And this is the team that Sylvia, Bob Nixon helped. We had some great help from people. Bob Nixon is the guy who brought you Gorillas in the Mist. So, and the team that produced the last film that got an environmental Oscar, The Cove, helped produce this. And what I am hoping, and keep my fingers crossed, is the next bit will work. If it doesn't, I apologise. this is an excerpt.
This is Cabo Pulmo, Mexico. For more than a century, it was a thriving fishing village. And then the tourists came. And then the sport fishermen. And then the industrial fleet with their long lines and nets. By the 1980s, so much had been taken from the surrounding water that nothing was left. In 1997, the people who live here took the ocean back. Together, they created a host spot 70 square kilometers around, making it completely off limits to fishing and dumping and drilling.
Okay, come on.
Since the protected zone was established, Cabo Pulmo has replaced fishing with ecotourism, and the community is thriving.
How is it possible that this is our first day?
I don't know, but it's true. It is absolutely true.
The idea of protecting the ocean to bring back the fish is an idea whose time has come. And it's beginning to work all over the world. A hope spot is a place that gives you cause for hope. It's a big chunk of the planet, or it can be a relatively small place, like Cabo Pulmo, where conscious efforts have shown that if you make an investment, care for a place, it can recover and be a symbol for hope.
It's time to thank Pete. Thanks very much. Yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, lady here. Oh, sorry, please.
I have a question. First of all, thank you for this great presentation. It was very enjoyable. My question is, how do you reconcile the economics of these stressors like fisheries and the conservation efforts? Because they seem to be just colliding. How do you do that in order to maintain this effort?
So I think at a local and regional scale, through management and zoning and different types of MPAs, you can do some reconciling of that. But I think when you look at the global scale, there are some things that we're doing that are just incompatible, and we're not going to be, we're the last generation to be able to do them. So if I look at some of the fishing on the high seas, we're doing that because it's poorly regulated, it has all those issues that people can get away with it. An orange roughy can grow to 250 years old. It doesn't breed until it's 20 or 30 years old. How can that be sustainable? And so I have a real issue that there are ways and means in which we can feed ourselves, but taking the lions and tigers out of the ocean, as I described earlier, taking the ancient things out of the ocean, sure, we'll be able to sustain for a bit, but ultimately we're removing stuff that next generations are not going to be pleased we did, I don't think. So I think there is regional and local things you can do, but I think we've got to change the rules locally.
Thank you. Your presentation has been inspiring. I think many of us are marine biologists, and I think we follow your work, you and Sylvia's work, and it is amazing. My heart now just pumps, you know. But I am a little worried because I feel like we are sending a message that things are okay on the ocean. And at the end, I just saw something that really is not. And we know that we need to map also, or to include in the information that we are doing. We should include the garbage patch. We should include where we are making pollution. Because we need to send another message. We have that responsibility. So I was wondering if you are thinking about including this in the maps as well.
Yeah. So I think there's two sides to this. One side is that the public don't particularly like to hear bad stories. They want to know what they can do. So the whole idea around Sylvia's thing is to show people they can do things. They can propose places and they can be listened to. And we have media outreach around Sylvia is about 30 million impressions a month. So if we can get people to be wanting to do things, we can tell the world. So that is one angle. The other angle is the harsh reality, and the harsh reality is not good. That's why I showed you the bad bits first, in a sense. We need to do far more. My perspective on this is that we actually know what we need to do. We're the first generation that actually knows what we need to do, and there's some hard decisions in it. And we look, for example, at, I talked a bit about climate change. The reality is, as of 6 days ago, countries which account for 90% of the emissions have put in their ideas of what they're going to reduce, how much they're going to reduce. It still adds up to nearly 3 degrees warming this century. So we have to give a reality check on that and say that's not good enough. And we need to use science. All of you doing science, it's never been so more important as it is now to get that science done and get that science out there. And we need to be completely honest in the political arena and with governments about what needs to be done. But with the public, we need to be trying to inspire them to engage much more. In terms of plastics, we really do need to try and solve this pretty quickly now. In a previous presentation this morning, I showed some of the stuff happening in Chile where they're actually providing an incentive to recycle fishing nets to make into skateboards for kids and sunglasses. And they're actually pretty cool things. And so you might be able to change the value chain, but ultimately we've got to stop putting some of this stuff in the ocean. There's no simple way to deal with this. Gillette, the people who make the razors, they've started to change their products to corn products instead of plastics. A small step may not be enough, but you've got to try and get some of the big players to change what they're doing. I think there's no simple answer, but I think we know what we need to do. My worry is that the previous generation will look back on us and say we were different to the previous generations. The previous generations didn't know. We know. The reality is there's going to be real questions about whether we acted in time.
there's a lot of millions of dollars going into that. But compared, there are millions of dollars going into that. But compared to space exploration, it's nothing. How can we convince the governments to spend more in the oceans? We have better maps of the moon than the bottom of the planet.
And it's a massive frustration. So it's a frustration I share with Sylvia. We may be coming out of a really bleak patch, but we've been decommissioning submarines. We've only been to the deepest part of the ocean twice. The most recent time was Jim Cameron, who went down there. And it's bizarre because, as I tried to demonstrate at the start of the presentation, we owe it to the ocean. Whichever way you look at this, it's the ocean that is fundamental to us, and we're just not spending enough money on it. And we need to, by working through different avenues, so that's why we'll try the World Heritage thing, we're trying media and films, to get people to open their eyes to the reality. But I share a great frustration that we are spending more money. So a photo I didn't show was we passed a milestone a year ago last February. A year ago last February we had the rover on Mars look up at dawn and it photographed the Earth and the Moon for the first time. So we've got the technology now to drive around another planet and photograph where we live, and yet we're not exploring and caring for the ocean, which we actually know is what supports us. It's kind of, in my book, a no-brainer, it's daft, and we need everybody to be pushing governments to spend more and to realise this is ultimately our future. It's ultimately the ocean that's going to regulate the climate.
Doctor, I see no more questions. Is there one? There is one more here? No? Yes, please, microphone here. Micrófono acá por acá. Aquí para la doctora Julia. The last one, doctor.
Thank you. Dan, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation and all the information that you gave us that give us the opportunity to really dig more into all those tools that you presented. I want to highlight that Colombia has been doing a big effort in the declaration of new protected areas. And as you showed us, the big hope are the marine protected areas, well managed. So I would like to ask you a little bit more of, if you could speak a little bit more about this, why the protected areas are the big hope, and that we all our countries should do more effort in the declaration of the marine protected areas.
So effectively, when we look at the tools that we have in the ocean, and we look at the responses we get from biodiversity, it's particularly the strictly protected, but other protected areas have other values in helping reduce conflict, where we see a lot of the benefits. The beauty about protected areas and protecting a space of the ocean which we know contains important ecosystems is we don't need to necessarily know about all the things we don't know about. Going back to your point about how much we spend on the ocean, we've tended to manage in isolation in other sectors, in fisheries. We've managed fish out of context of ecosystems. We've tried to do much more recently to do better. But when you're thinking of how do you make your life simple, well, simple protected areas with simple rules that you don't extract things are relatively simple to police. The more complicated protected areas are more difficult. So when you look at that, and then when you look at some of the science that we have, for example, over things like coral bleaching, now within the last few months over ocean acidification, it's the evidence which shows that these areas which have been protected are the ones that, sure, they get hit with problems, but they actually spring back quicker. So if you're actually thinking of how you rationally manage an area, they're not the total solution. The total solution is that we actually need to deal with the whole marine area and work out wise management across it, factor in the changes which are going to come from climate change. But unless you've got a core within that of places where you can trust the ocean can recover, can restore, can reseed areas, we're going to be in real trouble in the future. And the reason for that is that recent work done that was published by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in what's called AR5, which is their big description of the oceans, and by the way, last year was the first time they even had a chapter on the oceans. When we look at that, there are very clear predictions that things are going to move and change. And so what we need to do is have places where we invest, and we invest in resilience. And we know that those places are also going to be places that will help support local communities through sustainable action, fishing the line, for example, and things like that. There was doubt many years ago about whether these areas did do that. Well, they do that. And so when you look at this, all these different aspects, it's almost kind of like a no-brainer that we should protect things. You know, we're told the experiment sometimes is what will happen with a marine protected area. In reality, the experiment is what we've been doing with the whole ocean. The certainty is what you can get if you actually properly protect your ocean.